Hello, welcome to this really special episode of the India Story. Over the next 1 hour, we are going to take a really in-depth look and a deep dissection of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's historic American visit. We've seen a lot happening in the last couple of days, and we're going to have all the top experts joining us here in the studio over the next 1 hour to fully understand the implications. Indrani Bagchi is with us right now. She's one of the top writers on foreign affairs for a long time and the CEO of the Ananta Aspen Center. Mr. M.K. Bhadrakumar joining us, former diplomat. He's been serving in a lot of these areas. A range of guests are joining us. Dhruv Jaishankar is joining us, Executive Director of ORF. Is with us as well. Dhruv Jaishankar, thank you so much for being with us. Arun Kumar Singh, Michael Kugelman, R.K.S. Bhadoria, Arzan Tarapura, they're all going to be with us in just a short while. But before I come to any of the guests to try and get their implications, their understanding of all that's happened, let's just try and quickly sum it up. Those are some of the guests we've got coming up for you a little later. Well, let's just take a look now at some of the big takeaways. How is this 1 week going to be actually remembered? Well, there are 3 or 4 aspects to it. Number 1, the atmospherics, the body language, the pageantry, the thickness of the red carpet, if you like, that was rolled out. Now, all of those off the scales. I don't think there's ever been an Indian leader quite welcomed in that manner. The White House was thrown open, Indian Americans thronging the White House, a state dinner, a very lavish state dinner, address to Congress, the second time the Prime Minister was speaking out there. The atmospherics were great, couldn't have been better. The second thing that we're going to be looking at is the substantive business that was actually done. Atmospherics are great, but was any work done? And yes, once again, the answer has to be emphatically, yes, it was done. There were key agreements in defense, for example, co-production, tech transfer to the GE 414 jet engines, the procurement of those Predator drones, the Sea Guardian and the Sky Guardian drones, semiconductors. Micron Tech is going to be investing, for the creation of semiconductor plants out there. That's going to be lots of jobs coming up there as well. And major technology transfer. Applied Materials will be setting up a center as well. There was talk about activity in quantum computing. A lot of this perhaps had been mentioned earlier. It had been discussed in the press earlier. But there were a couple of surprises as well. Take a look at space, for example. The fact that there's going to be cooperation between NASA and ISRO, joint mission to the space station, and then India signing the Artemis Accords. That could have a major, major impact. So business, a lot of business was done, and we're going to take a look at all of that. But there were some discordant notes also, if this is a grand symphony that was playing out, there were a couple of discordant notes as well. Somebody sort of throwing trumpets or trombones out of the orchestra pit, as it were. Some of them perhaps were to be expected, that the press would, that the Western media would say X, Y, and Z. And there was perhaps expected that Ilhan Omar and others, they were going to be boycotting that. The fact that Barack Obama came out with a statement, that perhaps was a bit of a surprise, that interview and the timing of it, and we should discuss it. And then, of course, the entire question of democracy did come up, the Prime Minister directly taking a question on that at the press conference and answering it. So, a couple of discordant notes, but then let's discuss what the big themes out here were. Dhruv Jaishankar is with us, Michael Kugelman with us, as I said, Indrani Bagchi here, and M.K. Bhadrakumar as well. Dhruv Jaishankar, why don't I start with you? I spelled out the sort of broad landscape of all that we could at least see sitting out here and analyzing it. Do you think that was a fair summary? What would be the main things that you would pick on of what happened in the last couple of days?
Thank you, Vikram. I think you touched upon all the major issues. I think the most remarkable 2 aspects of it were, beyond the pomp and ceremony, were one, the breadth of the relationship was really showcased, and whether it is strategic partnerships, the U.S. bringing India into international organizations, India bringing the U.S. into Indian-led international organizations, joint collaboration in third countries, the defense relationship, whether it's economic and trade, and again, beyond the nice, happy talk, there were some actual deals signed, creating jobs and opportunity in both countries. And again, in the US, there tends to be sometimes an emphasis on a belief that this is a one-way relationship, but I think there was plenty to show Indian companies contributing in meaningful ways to the US economy as well. The technology partnership, I think, was really showcased, and finally the people-to-people relationship. So this was a really broad relationship, and then as you mentioned, the depth. I think we've had nice joint statements before, but this is one that actually had very concrete outcomes. Specific agencies in the two governments working together on discrete outcomes. Companies working together, public-private partnerships, specific scholarships for students to come, visa regimes, things like that. So I think that fine-grained detail was welcome and encouraging to see.
All right, Michael Cookman, let's get the headlines, and I do want to dive into all the things that we have been talking about and dissect them in some detail. But the broad headlines that you would pick up from what you saw, along expected lines, better than expectation, worse than expectation, how would you interpret it?
Well, one of the features of U.S.-India relations, as it's enjoyed exponential growth over the last few decades, is that the rhetoric and the messaging around it tends to be very positive, oftentimes soaring, which sometimes sets expectations that aren't met at high-level summits like this. But I think this one, which of course was a state visit, the expectations really were met. You had a number of big deals that went through, including several that had been discussed for quite some time but had not been consummated. And you look at the drones deal as an example of that. But I think the big headlines may be what ultimately isn't the most important outcome of the summit, but certainly the drones deal, the engines deal, the Micron deal, those are big ticket headlines. But for me, I think what stands out the most, I think reflecting what Dhruva said, is how this relationship has become much more multifaceted over relatively little periods of time. The fact that you now have higher education, space, tech, and so many areas outside of geopolitics, for example, that have become big areas of cooperation. I think that was what was celebrated, one of the things that was celebrated at this summit. But, for now, the big question is what comes next? Implementation, follow on. Will the soaring momentum that you have now be maintained? And particularly in the coming months, as both countries, both governments start to focus on their election campaigns and so on. And that's where I think the people-to-people, non-government aspects of this relationship are critical. You look to the business leaders, to the academics, the investors, the others to drive the relationship forward.
Right.